Hello and welcome to Region Locked. The Sega Saturn was definitely not the big hit that Sega was hoping for. One of the console's biggest competitors, Sony's PlayStation, dominated the console market while Sega trailed behind with a significant disparity between sales. One genre which saw increasing popularity during the era of the Saturn and PlayStation were more adult-oriented survival horror titles, such as Resident Evil. One of the last games to be published on the Sega Saturn in Europe tried to replicate this interest, developed by Sega themselves. Deep Fear. Deep Fear was published for the Saturn in 1998 in both Japan and Europe. The title is extremely reminiscent of Capcom's Resident Evil, though instead of being based within a zombie-riddled mansion, the story takes place in an underwater facility. The facility, SSB-01, otherwise known as the Big Table, is a naval refueling base and research lab located 300 meters below the Pacific Ocean. Because of cuts to the US Navy budget, space aboard the facility has been rented out to a variety of companies. These include a medical manufacturer called Medical Industry, a telecommunications company called Dynamic Network, and an agricultural company called Sea Farm. Space was also provided to the Emergency Rescue Services, or ERS. This organisation is civilian-operated and aims to assist in civilian-related rescue operations. The player takes on the role of John Mayer, a member of the ERS and an ex-Navy SEAL, who operates out of the Big Table as security personnel. A capsule has fallen from space and landed close to the facility's location, containing a chimpanzee that had been launched into space 40 years prior. The launch was part of an experiment to determine the effects of cosmic radiation on living beings, which has mutated the chimpanzee, slowing its metabolism and causing it to enter a state of hibernation. The crew attempt to examine the effects of the chimp's isolation in space to find ways of replicating the same result, allowing for humans to successfully adopt deep space travel. A nearby submarine, the Sea Fox, has recovered the pod and is dispatched to refuel at the Big Table, and to receive help with the investigation of the contents. But, unsurprisingly, things don't go to plan, and the Sea Fox crashes into the Navy area of the Big Table, which houses a secret research facility with a high security clearance level. A team of Navy SEALs are tasked as the primary rescue force, while the ERS are tasked with extracting a VIP doctor on board. To make matters worse, a mutation has begun to spread across the facility, transforming the humans that inhabit it, both alive and dead, into violent, monstrous creatures as a result of cosmically irradiated bacteria. Adding to this, the resident agricultural company Sea Farm specialises in breeding surface-dwelling animals, and now these other creatures have mutated and are causing havoc on the base. The mutation's weakness is exposure to high levels of oxygen, and thus the monsters work to destroy the Big Table's oxygen generators. John Mayer may be sick with a cold, but he's seemingly unaffected by the spread of the mutation, and works to escape from the Big Table and rescue those trapped within. Environments within Deep Fear are similar to Resident Evil, in that they use a fixed camera angle and pre-rendered backdrops. As the game takes place underwater, with a limited and dwindling oxygen supply, one of the necessary elements of survival is the air itself. The player must refill areas with oxygen to make them habitable again. The oxygen can be replenished a number of ways, including oxygen grenades, finding yellow boxes known as air systems, and if neither are available, the player can use an air regulator which can be replenished. However, as the facility is also occupied by mutants, the use of firearms is a necessity, something that does not lend itself to oxygen conservation, as firing a gun can deplete oxygen levels quickly. Much like Resident Evil, the player must first draw their weapon with one button and fire it with another. Unlike Resident Evil, however, the player can still move while their weapon is drawn, and can make use of a lock-on button to help target enemies. The player is also able to switch between locked-on targets. As the Big Table contains a Navy operations base, there is a large supply of weapons and ammunition available, though they are found within weapons storage locations. As security clearance is still in operation on the vessel, only some members of the crew are able to gain access to these facilities through keycards. The game's environments, both the Big Table and the Sea Fox, are also changeable. Oxygen supply is just one of the varieties of issues that must be dealt with, along with flooded locations and a map which is altered as the game progresses. Throughout the game, in true survival horror fashion, a variety of puzzles must also be solved. Similar to Resident Evil, various text-based articles can also be discovered and read, providing deeper lore to the game's story. One interesting aspect of Deep Fear is its control scheme. While most of the audience for the game would have played using the standard tank-like controls from Resident Evil, turning with left and right while moving with up, the game did also support the 3D controller. This was an optional controller released for the Sega Saturn, debuting with Nights into Dreams, which features an analog stick, and for the first time for mainstream controllers, analog triggers. When this controller is being used, the game controls very differently, with the player moving in the direction of the analog stick instantly rather than turning. This control scheme wouldn't make its appearance in Resident Evil until several years after Deep Fear's debut. Several members of the team behind Deep Fear are well known, including late manga artist Yasushi Nirasawa, who designed the various malformed mutations and is best known for his work with the Kamen Rider series. Coincidentally, Deep Fear's Japanese advertisement stars the Saturn's mascot Sagata Sanshiro, played by Hiroshi Fujioka, who was also known for his role as Takeshi Hongo, the first Kamen Rider. Shared names seem to be a common theme with Deep Fear, as the in-game company Shirahata Corporation shares its name with the game's co-director, Kunihiro Shirahata. The Sea Fox, the submarine that crashes into the Big Table, could also be a potential reference to earlier Sega titles Tails Adventure and Sonic Triple Trouble, which also features a submarine of the same name. The chimp which was recovered from the capsule was also very likely based upon the real-life chimpanzees which had been launched into space for NASA's Mercury project in 1961, Ham and Enos. Though unlike Deep Fear, both chimps landed safely back on Earth. One of Deep Fear's most recognisable downfalls comes in the game's voice acting. Similar to Resident Evil, the game has English dubbing in both PAL and Japan territories, and is of notoriously poor quality. One of the most bizarre character voices comes from Dubois, portrayed by Winston Kirk.
This is terrible! My masterpiece is ruined! Oh, what am I going to do?
Yeah. In a similar fashion to many games in Japan, Deep Fear received an audio drama adaptation released in 2 parts called Deep Fear Sound Drama Volumes 1 and 2, including both opening and closing songs with lyrics. Yuzo Sugano, who acted as the screenwriter for Deep Fear, would later go on to write and direct the 2001 survival horror title Extermination. Gabe Riley, a lieutenant in Deep Fear, shares the same surname as the main protagonist of Extermination, Dennis Riley. Extermination was originally pitched as a sequel to Deep Fear by developers Deep Space, who had started creating the game as a Dreamcast title in 1998. Their first pitch for the game was turned down by Sega, as not only did Deep Space pose a huge risk as an unknown developer at the time, but the game's story, content and gameplay had major contrasts to Deep Fear. Many of the staff members from Deep Fear would go on to work on Extermination, including screenwriter Yuzo Sugano, as well as background designer Moriyoshi Ohara, and 2D CG designer and planner Teku Kobayashi as the game designer. Deep Fear is very much geared towards a Western audience. While there is no official retail release of Deep Fear in the US, the intention was at least investigated in some small part. A US encoded version of the game has been circulated on the internet for a while, and auctions can be found for discs containing unreleased US builds of the game. An unlicensed Saturn release, known as Lost and Found Volume 3, created by Older Games in 2007, includes this unreleased US version of the title, though as this disc is entirely unlicensed by Sega, it cannot be deemed as an official US release. Reading into the data of the US prototype, the game's internal date is the 15th of July, 2 days after the 13th given on the PAL version. The only real difference between both versions is that the US NTSC release is optimised for 60Hz rather than PAL's 50Hz. Deep Fear holds the recognition of being the last ever published title for the Sega Saturn within PAL territories, providing a strong indication as to why Sega refrained from taking the title to US shores. As the console was nearing the end of its life cycle with poor sales, the cost of publishing the game would have been unlikely to recoup printing costs and do nothing to help increase sales of the dying console. The Sega Dreamcast was set to launch just a few months after Deep Fear's release, so much of Sega's focus had already shifted to promoting their new entry into the console market. Deep Fear is something of an oddity, remembered more for its appalling voice acting than its gameplay. People seem to respond more to the zombie-riddled house setting of Resident Evil rather than Deep Fear's underwater space chimp.
Is someone there?
Who are you?
Chad Barnum?
I can't get away from you. It's me, Clefairy.
Arcady Skywalker?
Stay where you are. Listen from there. The time I have left is short.
No.
Yes, my body is being taken over by Guillermo Chavez. I can't remember. I used to be called the Free Master Gamers. I have an error 1355. I want to fight one more time, like we did with Malcavio.
What?
I mean Corey Nelson. I said fight me. We can have one last epic battle.
I don't have a weapon.
I don't understand how you're still alive after all these years. Remember the battle with Robert Cox?
It was Trevor Wooten.
Don't come any closer! I don't want you to see me like this. I always thought of you like my brother, Vitus Varnus. I wanted to give you this after you and Jeddistotle 7 got married. It's a Doja Byron Red series. If only Paul White II could see this epic battle.
Thanks. What are you going to fight with?
Just this pen.
Thanks for watching. I've been Ashens, known for my YouTube channel, Ashens. That's really all I can say, isn't it?